نحمده ونصلي على رسول الكريم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. And welcome to another episode of Khatam Nabiyin. Last episode we left you in the situation where Saif was trying to gather some momentum, where he was trying to gather some strength and support in trying to overthrow the remnants of the Abyssinian kingdom that remained within Yemen. And he'd already been across to the Byzantine Empire in order to seek their support, but the emperor wasn't interested and he declined. His next approach was to go across to the Khosrow of the Persian Empire and speak to him. Khosrow did give him opportunity to speak to him and allowed him to come and sit with him and talk to him. And so, but Khosrow wasn't too interested, even though he was offering him that I would act Saif offered to him that I would act as a governor for you, and what I will do is that I will it will come under your kingdom, it will come under your kingship, but all I will do is I will run it for you, but at least together we can get rid of this foe that we have. But even Khosrow, after some discussion, said, look, I've heard your story, but your country is far away, and from what I gather, it doesn't really have many riches. So why am I going to get involved by sending an army into Arabia, potentially lose men along the way, fight a fight which I'm not interested in and I've got nothing to gain from? I don't need it, so I'm not interested. But, in order to show you some respect, he gave him 10,000 dirham and a robe of honor, and he gifted him to him, and he said, you may go. But Saif did something unusual. What he did was when he left, instead of taking the money with him and setting off back to Yemen, he started to hand out and distribute the money out to the people. So news reached the emperor, and the emperor was sort of thinking, that's a strange thing to do. You get a gift of 10,000 dirham. That's the first thing you do is, or the last thing you do rather, is to give it out. So what he did was he was brought again in front of the king, and the king questioned him as to what is it you're doing. And the individual said, well, what else shall I do with your gift? Our mountains are made of gold and silver in our country. Because, what's 10,000 dirham? It's nothing, pocket change. I'm more interested, what I have back home is worth more than this. So obviously this did tempt Khosrow's interest. Now hold on a second here. I was under the assumption that Yemen had very little to offer, but this man seems to suggest that literally the mountains are made of gold and silver. But again, it was nagging him in the back of his mind as to whether he should send a force into this no man's land and enter into a battle which wasn't his own war and potentially have little reward at the end of it. So he gathered his council together and he mentioned to them that, look, this man has approached me and this is what he's suggesting. What advice do you offer? They thought about it for a while, and then they said, well, look, you've got a large number of prisoners who are who are on basically death row, who are waiting for death. So why don't you do this? Why, you can kill two birds with one stone here. One is you could have them killed, or potentially have them killed. And secondly, you can offer them as soldiers to Saif. If they're successful, well, you don't lose anything because potentially you have a kingdom now which has not cost you anything. And if they're not successful, well, the prisoners will die, which is what you wanted to do in the first place. Now, obviously, Khosrow liked the sound of that. He was very happy with the council. So what he did was he ordered for the prisoners to be sent. And it worked out there was around 800 prisoners who had been sentenced for death. And they were put under a command of a man named Wahriz. And he was the eldest, and he had in terms of respect and ancestry. And they set sail on 8 ships. 2 of them sank along the way, and 6 ships then eventually landed on the coast of Aden. So Saif gathered some of his own men that had already stayed in Yemen, who were ready to revolt, who were ready to deal with the Abyssinian usurpers. So he said he gathered his men and Wahriz gathered his, and he says we will fight till the death, and it seemed like a fair thing to do. If you recall, Masruq ibn Abraha, the son of Abraha, the second son who had taken over, he then gathered his troops together and they met in battle. The first thing he did was Wahriz was to send his own son into combat. He wanted to see, the strength of this army that he was up against. And what he found, obviously, was his son was beaten and killed. And this further angered his father in order to see this through till the end. So when the enemies were all lined up, we had Wahriz and Saif the prisoners that had been sent by Khosrow, and also some of the Yemeni, the indigenous Yemenis that had, were unhappy with the way Masruq was leading them and sort of looking over them. So they were lined up on one side, and we had Masruq and his army on the other side, the Abyssinian army. So Wahri said to his men to indicate which was their king when the troops were all laid out. And they pointed to a man on an elephant with a crown, and he was wearing a ruby between his eyes. So he recognized now, because obviously the people, the Yemeni people were fighting alongside Wahri's, knew who their king was. He pointed him out. So when he saw this man, he says, look, I don't want any of you to attack him. Leave him for me. So for some time, nothing happened. People were just sort of staring each other out as it was. Then Wahri said, what's the Abyssinian king doing now? And they said, well, now he's got off the elephant and now he's sat on a horse. Again, Wahri said, do not attack him. Okay, wait. So they waited. After some time, Wahri asked again, where is the king now? And he was informed that the king is now sat on a mule. So Wahri said, okay, this is the right time now, because he's humbling himself. And what was happening, obviously, the battle was carrying on, so soldiers were losing, and mainly the Abyssinian soldiers were losing, because the prisoners had nothing to lose. They were already on death row. Death was waiting them. If they were successful in this battle, the only option they had left was to escape, or potentially seek pardon from the Persian king. Otherwise they were stuck. So for them, they had nothing to lose. And obviously the Abyssinians had already been living in this country, which they saw as a foreign country, which they had power over, which they had taken over. And they knew in the back of their minds eventually they'd have to go, eventually they'd have to leave. So the motivation was very different in both groups. As the battle was carrying on, he noticed obviously that his soldiers were losing, and many soldiers were being killed and slain in front of his very eyes. When he first started the battle, he was sat on the elephant because he kind of looked down on everybody as being the man in charge, as being the leader. But when he was losing men, he lost that confidence, he lost that authority. So then he sat on a horse, because he still felt dignified enough to sit on a horse, but not in the same situation to be able to be so authoritative that he's on an elephant. When he's losing more men and he's losing ground in the battle, then he's ended up on the mule, and this was the sign that Wahriz was waiting for. He says he's humbled himself now. This is the time where I take him out. He says, I'm going to take a shot at this person, and if you see his colleagues around him not moving, then carry on until I give you further orders, because I've obviously missed the man. But if you see the man drop to the ground and people crowd around him and stop advancing, then you're pretty sure that I've hit him. In that case, you then advance to them. So he took his bowstring on his bow, and his bow was exceptionally stiff. Those who've trained in archery will know the strength in the bow, or the propulsion to fire the arrow, is depending on how much potential energy is in the bow when it bends. So when the bow is bent and the string is attached, the more it bends, obviously, the more energy it has within it. So when the string is pulled, then this potential energy turns into kinetic energy and the arrow flies off. Now, very few people could actually bend the bowstring like the way Wahriz could. He was a very strong, broad-chested man, and he had very strong upper arms, which gave him the strength to be able to bend the bow and be able to fire it. He let this arrow go, and he was a very good marksman. And as he let his arrow go, the arrow landed absolutely smack bang in the middle of the ruby, which was between the king's eyes. He couldn't have got a better shot. Literally bullseye. It went through, obviously, the ruby smashed. It went through his skull, and it came back from the other side of his head. So it was a very powerful shot. As prophesied, or as determined, Wahri said, he was knocked off his mount because of the force of the arrow, and the Abyssinians gathered around him because they didn't expect this. They didn't know what to do now. This was the perfect opportunity where the Persians charged, and the Abyssinians were either beaten, killed, or they escaped and ran away from the battlefield. The goal of Wahriz was done. His aim was to free up Yemen from the Abyssinians. So he advanced towards Sana'a, And when he reached there, he had the gateway, because it was sort of an archway, but as he was going through the archway, his banner would have to be lowered. So what he did was he knocked the archway down so he'd be able to go in without lowering his banner. The Arabs were very happy at what happened, because obviously that had been quite a humiliation for the Arabs, that a foreign power had come in when the Abyssinians originally arrived in Yemen, and how Abraha had confidently and courageously advanced with his elephant and his army and literally knocked every Arab tribe on the way, and Arabs were so humiliated and disgraced. And here was Saif, another Arab from the Himyarite tribe, bringing back that honor by defeating the very Abyssinians who had taken power. So they came to congratulate him from the Hijaz. They sent delegations, they praised him, and they congratulated him. Similarly, Quraysh also sent a delegation, and in this was also the person we already know, Abdul Muttalib, the very same individual who requested his 200 camels back. He had gone down, Abdul Muttalib ibn Hashim, the grandfather of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at that time, Saif gave him the glad tidings of the coming of the messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and informed him what he knew about him. And we'll discuss that as we progress. We see here that the power that was established by the Abyssinians. Remember when we had the prophecy of Satih and Shiq, the two had prophesied, the soothsayers, going back a few episodes now, and they had prophesied that the Abyssinians would have authority for around 70 years. When the historians calculate the time, they say between Ariyat's arrival, remember Ariyat and Abraha, when Abraha fell out with Ariyat, well, didn't really fall out, but he had ambitions to be the single leader and not have to report to anybody. So when Ariyat had arrived, up until the time when Abraha killed him, and then Abraha took over, then if you remember Abraha's unsuccessful attempt at destroying the Kaaba, he then returned back to Aden, returned back to Yemen. He died basically coming back after we saw the description in Surah Al-Fil. Then his son took over. And when his son took over, then after him his second son took over, which was Masruq. And when Masruq ibn Abraha died by the Persians on that time, that was about 72 years. So that's four rulers: Ariyat, Abraha, Yaksum, which was the first son of Abraha, and Masruq, which was the second son of Abraha. So this was a power that lasted in Yemen for 70 years, exactly how we saw Shiq and Satih, or Satih rather, prophesize or predict from their soothsaying. We know from Ibn Hisham's account that eventually Wahriz dies, and then Khosrow chose another leader, and this was Wahriz's son, and this was Marzuban over Yemen. When he died, then he chose his son, Marzuban ibn Wahriz, which was Taynujan. And then later we see that Khosrow exiled Taynujan from Yemen, and he appointed another individual, Badhan, to rule. It was during the reign of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it was during his reign, as in the reign of Badam, that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was appointed for his mission. So just to give you the sequence of events, we know Wahriz had defeated Masruq ibn Abraha. He destroyed him. He was given the power. He was chosen by Khosrow to be the king. When he died, Khosrow chose his son, Marzuban. When Marzuban died, then Khosrow chose his son, as in Wahriz's grandson, Taynujan. And then Taynujan fell out with Khosrow. He wasn't following his orders, so he was exiled out from Yemen, and in his place, Badhan was established. And it was during this last person, Badam's reign, that the Messenger ﷺ was appointed on his mission. It is reported on the authority of Az-Zuhri that the latter said that Khosrow wrote the following to Badhan. He said, I am told that a man from Quraysh has appeared in Mecca claiming to be a prophet. Travel to him and ask him to seek repentance, because who is he to claim to be a prophet? If he repents, all well and good. If he does not, send me his head. That was the attitude of Khosrow. So Badhan sent Khosrow's message to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now we have jumped a bit, and the only reason why we've jumped a bit is I'm just giving you the sequence of the Yemeni relationship with the Prophet ﷺ and what happened. We'll obviously then go back in time, so to speak, and cover that in more great detail. But it's just that this this particular thread is going this way, so we'll follow this thread. So when Badhan sent Shazro's message to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he replied, he said, Yani Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised me that Shazro will be killed on such and such day and such month. When this response was brought to Badhan, he stopped and hesitated. He says, look, if he is a prophet, as in Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a prophet as he claims, then it will be as he said. And exactly how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had prophesied, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did kill Shazro on that day. So one of his prophecies came about. And in fact, Ibn Hisham mentions that it was at the hands of his own son, Shirawayh. And some others mention that there was a number of sons who got together and put an end. So the Shazro that we're referring to is named Abrawiz. Remember, Shazro was a name like we have Caesar, like we have Shazro, like we have Negus. I mentioned that certain leaders of certain places had titles. This was just his title. Like we see, for example, Prime Minister, President, King, Queen. We have certain titles given to people who rule in different ways, whether it's a republic, whether it's a monarchy, and depending on how they rule, they have that authority there. And we'll mention this as well later in terms of the story. But Shazro himself, Abrawiz ibn Hurmuz ibn Anushirwan ibn Qabath, and he was defeated by the Byzantine Empire, which is mentioned in Surah Al-Rum, Ghulibat al-Rum, and we'll discuss that later when that particular episode takes place. So when did this Shazro die? According to Suhaili, his death occurred on the night of Tuesday, the 10th of Jamad al-Ula, on the year 9th Hijri. So this was obviously after Hijrah had taken place as well. And it mentions is that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam had written a letter to this Shazro then, inviting him to accept Islam. We saw obviously or we will see, that when the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left Makkah and made Hijrah to Medina, he made a great effort to invite people to Islam, especially after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, because this gave him the flexibility and the ability rather to be able to invite people to the religion without the attacks or continuous pressure from the mushrikeen of Quraysh. He was given some freedom here, and he used this freedom effectively. And what he did was he invited tribal leaders. He himself went out, his companions went out and invited individuals towards the deen. But he also, like a statesman, wrote to key leaders around the area. One of those was Shazro, to invite him towards Islam. When he received this letter, remember this is the same Shazro who heard about Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Makkah claiming to be a prophet, and he wrote to Badhan to say that I want you to sort him out, basically, that I want you to go and get repentance from him, that he apologizes for making this claim, and if he chooses not to apologize, then remove his head. But Badhan wasn't too sure, you see, when he got a response back. He said, you know, if he is a prophet, then this is going to happen, and he didn't take it forward. So this is the same Shazro. So he wrote, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had a letter written to Shazro inviting him to accept Islam. But we know the nature of Shazro, a very arrogant man, didn't really hold the Arabs in high esteem, considered them to be no more than nomads or goat herders, and as a result he thought, how dare they tell me, who is the king of fine, I have fine material, we have absolute good governance in our country, we have strong armies, we have structure, we have social structure, we have political order. Who am I to take instructions and orders from people like them? So he became enraged, he tore up the letter, and then he wrote his own instructions to his governor in Yemen. Some report that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied to Badhan with the words, this night is the night in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will kill your master. And he was killed on that very same night. So when the news of Shazro's death reached Badhan, he realized that, hold on a second here, this is exactly what the prophet, this man, obviously at this point Badhan did not consider him to be a prophet, so let's talk from the perspective of Badhan. Now Badhan said that this was what this man said. He said, he prophesied this, that this is what will happen, and that's exactly what's happened. So he sent a word to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam that he wanted to accept Islam as well as the Persians that would come with him. So when the Persian envoys arrived, They said, who do we belong to, O Messenger of Allah? He replied, you are from us and to us, the people of the house. And is also mentioned Salman, who is mentioned as Salman al-Farsi. Why is he called al-Farsi? Radiallahu anhu, because al-Farsi, he was a Persian. Salman is of us and the people of the house. So we can see now that the development is taking place. But let's carry on with this thread in Yemen to see what happened after that. Because we're seeing now Islam arriving through Badam and his Persian fellows. And it seems this took place after the Prophet ﷺ had already emigrated. And then what he did was he started to send commanders to Yemen to inform people of what the religion was, to teach them what is good and how to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what the 5 pillars are, what is prayer, what is fasting, what is sadaqah, what is pilgrimage, and all those things which come after. So first he dispatched Khalid ibn Walid radiallahu anhu and Ali ibn Abi Talib. And then after these two, he dispatched Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiallahu anhu and Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu. And then Yemen, the people in Yemen accepted Islam in totality. As we carry on this thread in Yemen, Badhan then eventually died, and his son Shahr ibn Badhan ruled after him, and he was the one who took charge, and it was he who Al-Aswad al-Ansi killed after Al-Aswad pretended claimed prophecy. And this, when Al-Aswad was killed, then we saw the authority of Islam return to Yemen. So we can see how the story, how it started from Satih and all the way to Shaqiq, has carried on and brought us to this particular situation, and how we've moved on from there. But so we see how these in Yemen, the development is taking place, how power is going from one place to another, and how eventually Islam arrived through Badhan, his son. There was and then obviously the governors which the Prophet ﷺ had sent. Next, we're going to talk about the Kaaba. We'll return, because Yemen is now sort of being dealt with. We've talked about Yemen and what happened and how its history links towards the Prophet ﷺ's life. And we want to talk about next is the Khuza'a. And the Khuza'a is particularly associated with idol worship, and how idol worship arrived in the Hijaz, and how did the Arabs become pagan, and what was the surrounding for that. But in order to discuss that, you're going to have to join, or listen to that rather, you're going to have to join me again in our next episode, because as before, we've run out of time and we're not going to have sufficient time to complete it. So all I can say to you now is, the next chapter, or the next part we turn to now, is how is it that idol worship arrived, who was the cause, and what was going on in Mecca before the arrival of the Prophet. Now that we have quite a detailed history of what was going on in Yemen and the changes that take place. So I hope you can join me again as we continue our journey in Siratu Khatam al-Nabiyyin, the biography of the seal of the prophets, none other than Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're now getting little inclinations of his arrival. We're starting to see some crossover as we finish the story in Yemen about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and about certain key Sahaba whose name we may remember. So it's getting there. We're getting close. I hope we're going to be able to, in the next few weeks, be able to start the actual arrival of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how his life carries on. But the one thing that we hope that we are imparting is the understanding and the background to the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, because it's as important as we see the Quran narrates this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of these situations which took place, so we can take some understanding and see the environment to which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sent. I hope you can join me again. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.